Our first E-Ride Pro SS 3.0 just arrived. Let's get into unboxing it. So here it is, the 3.0, one of the first production bikes in the country. And I think it's easier to actually start with what's similar on this bike to the 2.0 because there are so many changes that were made. Now, it might be easier to talk about this like an evolution of the 2.0. This 3.0 looks and feels like the 2.0's bigger, older, more grown-up brother. Everything's better. Bigger battery, more power, better suspension, better brakes, better wheels, stronger frame. Even the 428 chain driving all that power is better. What's similar is really interesting. The bars are the same, the controls are the same, the frame is the same shape. The benefit of that is any or most of the aftermarket parts that may fit on a 2.0 will also fit on this 3.0. Now I should probably start with the drivetrain and let's go through each individual detail to kind of share what we can see, what we know about this bike in its production form. So the battery is a 72 volt 50 amp hour battery. It is being pushed by 15.8 kilowatts. So we're just going to round up to 16 kilowatts. The 3.0 also has the newer upgraded stronger battery wiring and connector. It is driven through an even stronger motor than before. As I mentioned, a 428 chain helps to put that power to the ground, and it is stopped by DOT4 brakes with just absolutely massive rotors. Those things are 3 mil thick, and they look the part here on the bike. The suspension has been upgraded as well. It's fast ace up front, with better seals out of the box, which means no more leaky front forks, paired with a fast ace rear shock as well. If you guys know a little bit about us, you know that we love the fast ace setup because it's an incredibly strong chassis, it's extremely tunable, and it does its job extremely well. I doubt very few people are going to complain about the suspension on this bike. What has been upgraded from the small parts is a direct mount stem, which is actually pretty tall. This setup looks like maybe because I'm 6 feet tall, I could add 1 inch taller bars, but this is already a great height just out of the box. And the foot pegs are wider, most likely inspired by all the street riders who are wearing tennis shoes and want a wider platform so that they feel more comfortable. They do have removable pins. You could take those off if you don't want to destroy your tennis shoes, but they will work extremely well out of the box as well. Speaking of street-going riders, you notice that these tires look like Shinko 241s. They're actually produced by E-Ride Pro, and they're sitting in an 18-inch rear, 19-inch front setup. Now we think that an 18-19 setup is actually a great idea because where previously you had to replace an entire wheel set to change the size, You can now choose to only purchase one wheel and go with either an 18, 21-inch setup or a 16, 19-inch setup. It saves you quite a bit of money if you're choosing to go with those sizes and add moto tires as an example. Now, a few of the smaller features that we don't want to overlook are super cool. One, instead of a turbo button, it now has a reverse, which is incredibly cool. That turbo button probably didn't get used very much. You will be surprised how often you'll end up using reverse. The head and tail light are now working on the same light switch, so when the lights are off, they're both off. When you turn them on, they're both on. Super cool feature. And the multicolor display now has way more information on it. So it has both a trip A and B, if you choose to use that. Of course, it has your speedometer for miles per hour as your total distance. It actually shows you what regen mode you're in now. So regen can be off, 1 for mild, 2 for strong. It also has battery temperature, motor temperature, and controller temperature that you can monitor as you're riding even harder, pushing this battery and motor to its limits. You'll know that just by looking down at the display. And then if you're not familiar with eMoto yet, it has the standard functions like Sport and Eco so that you can control what power mode you're in. So as a general rule of thumb, we often tell people that Eco mode might be 30% less power than the Sport mode, but Sport on full throttle is sitting at 15.8 kilowatts, which is incredible for $49.99 out of the box. So I know weight's a big topic for everyone. It's just one of the specs that we all care about. So as the 3.0 sits right now on our scale is 165.5 pounds. If you want to compare that, the next bike down, the existing 2.0 in the market that we all own today is 146 pounds. And then if you go down even further to the S model, that is right about 135.5 pounds.
I don't know about you guys, but anytime I'm getting ready to buy a new bike, one of my first thoughts is, what's the aftermarket support like? If I crash my bike and I break a part or I want to upgrade something, can I? That's a really big deal to me personally. So I've kind of spent the entire morning tearing apart this bike and taking measurements to see what parts do and don't fit. So let's get into that. So let's start with the obvious stuff. Something that I change the moment I get a bike is handlebars. These are 31.8 mil handlebars, very common handlebar size, totally easy to change those out. And if you want a motocross style bar, you can put these shims in this direct mount stem to get that to work. So that's no problem. That's very common amongst all the bikes. The direct mount stem itself, same bolt hole pattern as all the other direct mount stems on the market. So that is another part that's just universal across these. Now, if you go to an aftermarket direct mount stem, it might be a little bit wide and interrupt this display mount here. Luckily, we make display mounts that are wider than the one that comes stock on the bike. So if you do a different direct mount stem, you might have to get this as well to be able to make that fit perfectly. Now, foot pegs are the exact same foot pegs that come on the eRide Pro 2.0, and they're also the exact same foot pegs that come on a Sur-On Light B. So that's nice, that's super easy, I can change these out. Another thing is the foot peg mounts. This is the exact same frame, aside from a few points in the frame internally that they've stiffened up. This is the same frame as all of the previous bikes, so these foot peg mounts are the same in the aftermarket world as well. I usually use the Warp 9 1-inch drop mounts. Those fit onto this bike no problem. The rear shock, also the exact same shock is on all of the other bikes. So the Sur-On Light B shocks, the Tuleria MX5, MX4, MX3, all those shocks fit. Across the industry, pretty much every single 8-inch rear shock is the same. In terms of cosmetic things, this is the same seat as the Pro S and the Pro SS 2.0. So if you need a seat cover, you can put the exact same existing seat covers on the market onto this bike, as well as graphics kits. If you want to get a graphics kit for this, the frame is the exact same, the number plate's the same, the fenders, all the same. So you can get any graphics kit for an eRide Pro SS and it'll work on this bike. Now, sadly, it's time to get into a couple of things that are pretty different, and this is going to get a little bit complicated. starting with the front fork. Yes, this is a Fast-Ace front fork, but there's one adaptation on this fork that makes it different from all the other ones, and that is the brake mount. So to fit these new brakes on here, the spacing is 100 millimeters. That is a huge spacing, and the foot on this Fast-Ace fork adapts straight to that. I kind of wish they would have stuck to the previous brake mount points and just made an adapter to this brake. That way it would have been just a little bit easier to put different forks on this bike, but eventually the aftermarket will catch up and make a separate adapter so that you can put other forks onto this bike. But as of right now, unless the fork you're putting on this bike has 100 mil spacing for the brake caliper, it will not work. That is a little bit of an inconvenience when it comes to upgrading this fork. However, I am very, very glad that they went to this new style of brakes. I'm going to show you a comparison between the stock brake pads that come on a 2.0 and the brake pads that come on these new .4 brakes. Huge difference. Something else that I am notorious for bending and breaking is the pivot axle that goes through these bikes. Now, the E-Ride Pro SS 2.0 has got a smaller axle up here, so that axle is not compatible with this one. They moved up to a larger size axle, which also changes the size of the Jackshaft, and this has a larger belt. So all of that being the case, this axle is not compatible with the 2024 model. With all of these different variances coming into play, please read the description when it comes to purchasing a part. Hopefully the vendor that you're purchasing from has got a fitment guide in there, and hopefully it's very lined out on what parts do and don't fit these bikes. So they changed the Jackshaft pivot axle, but they did not change the rear axle. So the E-Ride Pro SS 2.0, whether that's a 2024 or a 25, does fit the E-Ride Pro 3.0, which is really good news because there are aftermarket cryo-frozen hardened steel axles. They've got lifetime warranty on them. I'm referring specifically to the Warp 9 one. That's an extremely strong axle for these bikes that I run in my personal bikes. I've bent and broken titanium. I've bent and broken the regular steel axles that come in these. I've yet to bend and break cryo-frozen steel. So definitely go for one of those if you're just like me and tend to bend things. Now previously we mentioned having an 18 in the rear and a 19 in the front is nice because you can upgrade one wheel at a time and get either a 1619 setup or an 1821, but the aftermarket hasn't caught up quite yet to where you can go and immediately do that. Sadly, these wheels are different than any other wheel that exists on the market, so your E-Ride Pro SS 2.0 wheels will not work, and the reasoning behind that is the spacing of the rotors as well as the sprocket. That is a bummer. The aftermarket world does need to catch up on that. So I was thinking, you know, what wheels might fit onto this bike? The Celerio MX-5 has got similar brake rotors, right? It does, but sadly, even those wheels are different from this bike's wheels. Those wheels, the brake rotors are 68 millimeters. The E-Ride Pro, 64 millimeters. So that little bit of a difference obviously means you can't mount up the same rotors. Luckily, all the rotors across the new bikes that are coming out, like the Altis, the Celerio MX-5, and this bike, they are 3 mil thick, so that's really nice for heat dispersion, but they are different hub spacing. I don't know the exact spacing of the Altis Sigma yet. We will measure that the moment we get a bike in studio, but as of right now, the wheels that go onto an E-Ride Pro 3.0 and the wheels that go onto a Celerio MX-5, not the same. The wheels that go onto an E-Ride Pro 2.0 and the wheels that go onto an E-Ride Pro 3.0, also not the same. So right at this very moment, if you wanted to go to a 21-inch front wheel and get an 1821 setup, what would it take to do that? Well, luckily the fork spacing is still 120 millimeters from end of spacer to end of spacer, so the existing previous wheels, like the ones that fit onto the E-Ride Pro 2.0 and the Sur-Ron Lightbee, are the same spacing as this, but you would need a 3 mil thick rotor that's also a 220. I don't know of one that exists right now, however there might be one hopefully very soon. That way you could just adapt a front wheel that already exists on the market onto this bike, but as of right now, your front rotor is what's going to be holding you back from being able to put a 21-inch wheel on this bike. Now, if you wanted to, which I wouldn't suggest because I do not want to go away from these brakes, you could change your full suspension in the front. You could change to a Sur-Ron or an E-Ride 2.0 front wheel, and you could change your front brake. If you do all of that, Yes, you can put a 21-inch on the front, but once again, I would just say wait a couple months. It shouldn't take long for vendors like Warp 9 or other wheel manufacturers to catch up and make wheels specifically for this bike. I know they are going to. They're also going to make wheels specifically for the Teleria MX-5 and for the Altis. These are all bikes that have gained popularity, and the bikes that are the most popular are the ones that the aftermarket is going to support. So luckily, E-Ride Pro is one of those brands.
So we could add a lot of banger reels right now and show us out riding the bike, but it's snowing outside, and we're gonna have to drive a couple hours south to go in and really do this bike justice. We don't wanna just be out freezing trying to have fun on a bike that you can tell it's not very good for us. So what we're gonna do is we're going to give you a chance to actually comment below. Tell us what you wanna see out of this 3.0 as we go and ride it. We're gonna save comparisons for later, but it is easy to know going into this that people are going to ask, well, how does it compare to my existing 2.0? So with that said, let us know what you want to see. We'll be talking about power and range and feel, if we can feel the additional weight. Do we like the tires versus moto? Anything goes in this next video. Be sure to drop a comment below and let us know what you want to see about the E-Ride Pro SS 3.0.